My name is Harper Lane, and when I was 29, my dream took an unexpected turn. I was a young brand manager at a growing food company, living in the heart of the bustling city that I believed was my destiny. But then one night my parents called me home. They sat at the old kitchen table, where I used to do my homework as a kid, and told me the family was going bankrupt. "We need you," my mother said, her voice hoarse. "No one understands the new market like you. If you come back and help them through this crisis, you'll be the one to make the cake." This isn't advice. It's a promise. I had grown up surrounded by the smell of flour and the crackling of ovens, so when I saw the desperation in my father's eyes, I knew I couldn't turn away. I left my burgeoning career, my important dinners, and returned to a small town where everything was old, except for the faith I had placed in the promise. I didn't come back for the money. I came back because I believed that family was worth sacrificing. Little did I know that the promise, seemingly sincere, would be the deepest cut later. That winter I returned to Elkwood, the small town where I grew up, and where the Lanes oven had been the heart of the community, only the old oven had been the heart of the community. Returning wasn't easy. The first day, I woke up at 4 a.m., wearing the same apron, my hands used to the laptop now kneading dough, mopping floors, and checking ingredients. Gone was the shiny showroom, just the damp kitchen and flour, and an old oven that groaned every time it opened. My father was almost exhausted, my mother was emaciated after months of struggling with debt and litigation over a wrongly labeled product. They didn't need a manager, they needed a reviver. And I became everything: baker, delivery person, accountant, menu designer, social media manager, supplier liaison and spiritual support. I spent long nights sitting alone on the cake, eyes closed at the computer, rewriting the business plan from scratch. I started simple, redesigning the packaging, optimizing the cost of ingredients, and most importantly, I listened to customers. I introduced a loyalty program, added online ordering, and launched a seasonal menu with creative dishes that kept the traditional spirit. A month passed, the cake shop started to have customers again. 3 months later, we had enough money to pay salaries on time. 6 months later, we received an invitation in the local newspaper. When I featured the cake on the cover of the Midwest Food Revival magazine, my mother cried when she saw me presenting the cake with the title, "Girl Goes Back and Researches Family Heritage." But I didn't need the title. What I wanted was a promise kept. Every time my father waved, smiled, and said, "When everything is settled, this loaf of bread will be yours, Harper," I believed it all over again. I didn't ask. I didn't sign any contracts with my parents. I believed in the blood, the fat nod, and the warm words of the man who taught me to bake my first loaf of bread. Whenever I felt tired, I reminded myself, it will all be worth it. This is mine. I'm building a future. Then one day, almost 3 years later, we were officially debt-free. No more bank accounts, no more bills at the back door. I printed out the financial statements and placed them on the table in front of my parents as a victory. My father was smiling. But there was something else in his eyes. Not complete pride. Just a little bit of reserve. A small, subtle crack, and I didn't notice it. Today, I didn't know that the numbers in the report were evidence of a revival, but also a warning of an impending betrayal. We threw a small party to celebrate the day that Lane's oven was officially out of debt. The warm yellow lights in the shop reflected on the glasses of non-alcoholic cider raised in celebration. Long-time customers, loyal employees, and close friends were all present. I had prepared special cakes, handwritten thank you notes and put them in small gift bags. And then Cameron showed up. My little brother, the kids who had run away from home to find themselves in Asia 2 years ago, had sent the same email to his adoptive father about enlightenment and sustainable business. He walked in a romantic suit, a lightly wrapped gift, and a cheeky smile. My parents hugged him as if he had just been given a ray of light from heaven. I didn't feel any hate, just a slight chill down my neck, like wind on wet skin. After everyone had left, my parents called Cameron and me into the back office. I remember the smell of clear ink, the pale white light of the ceiling lights, and the nervousness in the guard's eyes as my mother laughed. "We wanted to tell you both something," she began. "We've decided to hand over the reins of the Leaf to Cameron." I imagined I'd heard wrong. I turned to my father, expecting him to correct me, laugh, and say, "Just kidding." But he slowed down. "You've done a great job, Harper." "Really?" "But now it's Cameron's turn to take over, to continue the mission." "I've been here for 3 years," I said, my voice hoarse. "I paid my debts, I changed things. I believed, for my parents' sake." "You'll always have a place here," my mother interrupted. "You're part of this store." "But Cameron is, the next one." I looked at my brother, he was still smiling, scratching his head, saying something. Not a word of refusal, not a hint of shame. I left the store that night without another word. It was raining lightly, ever so gently on my hair that hadn't responded to the force. I didn't go home, didn't turn on the lights. I drove around town, past the streets where I'd spotted the fallen leaves advertising, past the market where I'd judged the price of every ingredient, past the backyard where I'd cried alone on Christmas Eve because the supplier was a minute late. I pulled into the lakeside parking lot, put my head on the steering wheel. In truth, the pain wasn't from the fallen leaves. It came from a job that had been erased from something I had built with blood, tears, and dreams. A promise that was ready not to change the situation, but because of the inevitable, they did not keep their word. I did not go to the leaves this morning. Nor in the days that followed. Instead, I found an email I had sent to 5 banks. "When everything is settled, you will be the operator. We will make it official, because you deserve it." I read it over and over, each word cutting deeper. Then I sent it to my lawyer, an old friend of mine, an old friend who had joked that if I needed him to make a contract for the leaf cake in dreams, he would be willing. Yes, this time, I did not need to dream anymore. I needed the truth. And the job. I still remember the first lesson with my lawyer, Mr. Langston. Formula shock from a man in his 40s, a former prosecutor who had switched to representing civil cases, especially those involving families and small businesses. After I laid out everything, the work, the contributions, the promises, and the shock of the family decision, he just sat there, nodding. Then he asked exactly one question, also a step. "Harper, did they promise anything in writing?" "Text messages, the plan here." I was ready. I pulled out a printout of the email my father had sent, along with a row of text messages, plans, shared files, and a recording of an internal meeting a year ago, where my father told the staff that Harper is raising the bar for continued management. We will officially transfer when the debt is paid. Mr. Langston considered it and nodded again. "We have a case. It may not be easy to win, but you have evidence. And above all, you have the truth." A week later, the lawsuit was filed, a claim for ownership by promise and letter, along with a report of unpaid labor and a report of fraud. The news leaked out not long after. A small article in the local paper was headlined, "Daughter takes family to court over bakery, a promise betrayed." My parents responded immediately. Not a phone call to apologize, but a condition, their lawyer. I received a 3-page letter denying the full promise that had been made. They claimed that I had volunteered to help because I was the daughter of the family, that I was paid by living rent-free at home, a claim so absurd that I laughed for a moment. I paid for the electricity, the internet, even used my own money to buy a new mixer when the old one broke in the middle of Christmas. But what hurt me most was not the cold letter. It was Cameron, during that time, who was completely silent. Not a single text, not a single call. He had not only taken my place, but had chosen to stay behind in silence, behind the pre-failure fantasy. One morning, I went to the store, not to work, but to pick up the few remaining personal belongings to go home. Cameron was sitting comfortably in the back, relaxing, and turned around. When he saw me, he just said softly, "You came to pick up your stuff. This is all, a bit of a unicorn, huh?" I looked at him and asked directly, "Do you really believe you deserve that seat?" He had a roll. "You did a lot, I know. But you only kept Leaf. I was the one who took it further." There was no bitter decision about the blind authority of privilege, of the son of a traditional family, where a woman could bleed and stink, but still be excluded from the line of paper just because she wasn't born with the right nature. I walked out of the store that time with a mind clearer than ever. This was the value of fair labor, of a promise of honor, and of a woman whose name was removed from her own construction company. And this time, they wouldn't be able to stop me with silence. The courtroom was cold and quiet, the white fluorescent light seemed to dim all emotions. I sat next to Mr. Langston, my hands clutching the file. Each page was a trace of 4 years of my life. On the other side, my parents avoided my gaze. They were on the other side, not because of greed good, but because he seemed tired of being pulled out of his moral shell. Cameron did not come. No surprise. First serious, the judge was an old woman, her eyes dangerous but not lacking in subtlety. At the beginning of the session, she asked a simple question. "Mr. and Mrs. Caldwell, is there any evidence that the ownership of the cake was legally transferred to Cameron?" The transfer was financial. Their lawyers continued. The transfer was only completed recently after the cake was financially stable. And before that, just a family misunderstanding. This, and the price only saves the business, they set up. That was when Mr. Langston stood up, his voice even and restrained. "And understand that the wine is only valuable when it is convenient for the design. When they need Miss Harper to sacrifice, they promise. But when she studies the business, they set her up for all the benefits. You did better than expected." He showed an email from my father. "You did better than expected, Harper. When the debt is paid, the cake will be yours." Arrangement. The judge. She read slowly, paused for a few seconds, then increased, "Then there is a promise. The printout has been sent to the judge." She read slowly, paused for a few seconds, then increased. "The table is promised, there is evidence. But there is no action as committed. This, by law, can be considered fraud on the interests of trust." The sentence echoed down the wall of their illusion. I returned the favor. My father said nothing. There was no denying it. There was no turning back. I didn't need them to kneel or cry. I just needed to be truly acknowledged, that I wasn't crazy, that I didn't need the process, and that I was worthy. This is not a report. This is justice. 3 days after the final version of the hearing, the merger agreement was signed. My name, Harper Ellison, appeared unidentified, was clearly on the legal papers as the rightful owner of Ellison's Bakehouse, my hand in the beginning, my eloquent every moment of my life being cut off. I held the agreement in my hand, feeling not a victory, but a sense of completion. After all the loss, silence, and betrayal, I had taken back what was mine from the beginning. This morning, I walked into the bakery feeling completely different. Everything was familiar, the smell of baking, the soft hum of the oven, the warmth of the air, but the space felt larger, breathing with me. The staff responded, not out of fear, but out of respect. No one was fired. No one was punished. This was not revenge, but the beginning of a new culture, where recognition was given based on strength, not bloodline. Cameron avoided me for the first few days, but then he came. Stay still, serve, say sorry. I didn't need it, but I appreciated it. Not to be third, but to get it back. Harper Ellison, owner, and I stood in my new office, looking out onto the street, my hand resting on the wooden nameplate. Harper Ellison, owner and visionary. I couldn't get a seat at the banquet table. I automatically build that table, and this time, my name will resolve the table to what I built.